Alright, so I'm going to do, I've told a lot of people that I can my own rice, and people think I'm crazy, so I'm going to show you what I'm doing here. Down there I've got a big bucket of organic brown rice from Texas. I get it from my local the food co-op that we have set up here, purchasing club or whatever. Buy it in bulk. And you see over here on the stove I've got a bunch of mason jars, and I got my scale out, and I've got my other things, well, my canner and so forth. So this is something I sort of came across by accident or by experiment, or I don't know, and everything I've read, I can't find any official guide on canning rice, and everybody seems to think it's stupid or dangerous or whatever. So keep that in mind. I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing this, but I do it. It's convenient. So what I'm going to do, what I do is I work this out backwards by I cooked rice and then measured the volume of the cooked rice and then did some calculations to see how much dry rice I would have to put into one jar in order to get it to cook in the jar as I can it in the canner. Now all the guides I see say not to can rice, but they're talking about rice that's already been cooked, and I just can't find anybody out there doing this. Maybe there's a reason for that. I've been doing it for a couple of years now, no issues. So for a 1 pint jar or 500 milliliters, I find that 2/3 of a cup of rice is right. And I've never weighed it before. I'm going to weigh it today because it can be very picky. If you put in just a little bit too much rice, you'll actually burst the jar when it's canning in there. So I'm going to weigh it for the first time, and then I'm going to start going by weight instead of by volume. So this is just shy of 1/3 of a cup, and that weighs 69 grams. And another just shy of 1/3 of a cup, so that is 138 grams. Another reason that I want to go by weight is that when I use this particular brand of rice, everything works out really well. I've tried other brands and it's a little bit variable. I don't get quite the same results. I think the key reason is that the different brands of rice have slightly different densities. So 1/3 of a cup or 2/3 of a cup of one brand of rice is not exactly the same weight as 1/3 of a cup of another brand. So if I start going by weight, then I should be good no matter what brand of rice I use. And I suspect, and I'm going to try it here with one jar on this batch, I suspect that if I'm going by weight, I can also use the same weight for other grains like barley. I'm going to try to can up some barley for the first time ever, and I'm going to use 138 grams. So there's one jar. So basically just go around and fill up all the jars, not fill them up, put the appropriate amount of rice in. So 138. There's 138. So basically what I do is I'm just going to do one or two now, and then turn the camera off and then do them all. You don't have to watch me doing them all. I also have here some salt. This is Himalayan rock salt. That's what I use, and I've got these little pinch measures here. This one is called a smidgen, and that's how much salt I put in each one. Actually, there's a smaller one missing here. They're normally all on the loop. There's a smaller one missing here that I normally use called a pinch. So I'm going to put in half of a smidgen, which I think is probably a pinch of salt in each jar. And then I'm going to show you when you fill it up with water. So I'll take this one over to the sink. You're going to hear me running water over here. Sorry, I'll show you in a minute. So what I do is, when I'm doing the water, I put it about halfway first, and you got to make sure all the grains get good and wet, which won't necessarily happen if you just put the water in there. So I fill it about halfway with water, and then give it a really good stir about, and then I put the water in the rest of the way. And what I've also found is that I use just a slightly lower fill level than normal. Let me see if you can see that when it's up this close. Yes, you can. So normally you go to this ridge on the bottom, and you can see I'm going probably 1/4 of an inch below that. And that's what I found to be about right for doing this. So I'm going to go through and fill up the rest of these jars with rice and water and a little bit of salt, and then we're going to put them in the canner and show you how it goes from there. Alright, there's one jar left, and as I mentioned, I'm going to do barley in that one. Just out of the sake of curiosity, I'm going to measure 2/3 of a cup of barley to see what it weighs. I doubt it's going to weigh 138 grams. Put the same amount in. That's 143 grams. I'm guessing that's going to be too much. I'm going to go to 138 grams. There we go. It was only a tablespoon of difference, but I found that it only takes a little bit of difference to burst a jar. Anyway, we'll see how it goes from here. So now we're on to putting the lids on. And this is just general canning. The books always say to take a cloth and wipe the rims. I actually find it's better to use my finger. For one thing, sometimes you can get on jars that have been used a lot, and depending on what's been in them, you can get a thin film built up on the rim here that's almost impossible to see, but you can almost always feel it with your finger, and any kind of obstruction whatsoever on that rim can prevent a proper seal and potentially make for dangerously canned goods. So I like to give it a wipe here. This also lets you feel if there's a slight nick in the rim. Any slight nick in the rim, discard the jar immediately. So I like to give it a wipe with my finger versus a cloth. That's how I ensure it's as clean as possible. And when you put the lids on, they should be just finger tight. Don't crank it down, because the way these two-piece lids work is that when it's in the canner, that lid is supposed to be able to vent air from inside the jar, and that's what then creates the seal, the vacuum seal, when everything cools down. So if you crank that down as hard as you can, it's not going to be able to vent properly, and it could produce dangerously canned goods. So we just go through them all, check the lids, check the rims carefully, make sure you're using new lids. You don't reuse these snap lids. It's okay to reuse the rings, but you never reuse a snap lid. I save snap lids and use them for like just covering a jar when I store it in the fridge or something like that. Like I use these jars for leftovers. So that's why I'm checking them all, because I do keep in the same box. Sometimes I'll have my used lids that I just keep on hand for storing leftovers in the fridge or whatever. Alright, so go through it all, get them all lidded up like that, and then we'll put them in the canner.